Hi there, and welcome to another interesting, insightful, exciting conversation. Today, we have Joey Chandler here with us, who is the founder of Find Your Way Consulting. He helps business owners or people in general, professionals, to use their core values to solve problems, increase their confidence, foster innovation, to overcome their challenges, to really create hope using their core values. So obviously we do talk a lot about core values. What are they? How do we find them? What do we do when we find them? And we realize that we have been masking and hiding and not living true authentic lives. How we then put it in practice? How do we then use it to grow and have more fulfilling lives? It's a beautiful, exciting conversation, and I cannot wait for you to hear it. So let's go.
As like normal, here is your reminders before we start this really beautiful conversation. Please like, subscribe, hit that notification button, because the further the reach we have, the further and more people can get such amazing wisdom and knowledge from our guests. And we love to share their experiences, their perspective, and their wisdom with you, our listeners. So please do hit all those buttons, share, like, and follow. And one last thing, we have a newsletter. We only send it out twice a month, so you don't get bombarded with a lot of information. But what we do share is some of the wisdom that we've got from our guests, because we just love what our guests have shared with us. And you get a few little bit of tidbits from myself and Lenka as well. So please do subscribe and feel free to share that newsletter with anybody who you feel would benefit from the content in it. And it's not a long newsletter. But now let's get on with our conversation.
Hi, Joey. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
All good. So excited to have this conversation with you today. So please tell us and our listeners a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, what gets you up in the morning. Let us know a little bit of a, teaser of what this conversation might actually be about.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. I just really appreciate the chance to be here. My name is Joey Chandler. I am a core values coach. I help people clarify their core values and then either use it to improve their performance or recover and prevent burnout. And I live in Reno, Nevada. I just went skiing yesterday. I have a 17-year-old son who is graduating high school this year, which I cannot believe. And yeah, my main thought is that we all have something at our core, and the more that we can tap into that and clarify that and use it, just the better the chances are that we have of creating success in a way that works for us. I really started all this work because I realized that so many of us, we read books, listen to podcasts, but we don't really take in what we say. We're going to do it our way anyway. So I said, hey, let's just figure out people's core values, how we can use that, and then they're going to do it their way. And I just find it works really well.
Oh wow, we really live different lives. You were skiing and I'm in Spain. It's hot and finally proper summer. So when having a dip in the sea the other day, so very different lives. But what resonates with me from what you were saying, it's finding way to really understand ourselves, really know our core values, because we live in a world where there is lots of external pressures on what our values should be, what our priorities should be, what should we look like, what should we behave like, what kind of a work should we have, how much money we should be making, all the shooting all of ourselves here and there. And so little we are encouraged to truly pay attention to what we want and what is important to us. So I would love to know, how did it happen for you? Like, have you always been more in tune with yourself? Have you been nourished to be in tune with yourself? Or maybe did you have a journey where you had to figure it out? You've been, on the mainstream path and realized, wait a minute, what am I doing? Why am I just checking off the milestones that just, I presume everyone is doing? How did it ended up for you to really connecting and understanding that our core values are something that really makes such a difference on the fulfillment of our lives if we live in alignment?
Yeah, I'm laughing because the idea that I had it all figured out from early age is so not not my experience. I can't even. I'm like I've learned stuff from last week that has changed my life. That idea. No, I'm very much of a guy who has stumbled his way to a level of I'm just say a level of awareness but it's not happened because I've been brilliant. It's more happened because I've been stubborn and willing to just kind of keep pulling threads and digging in. Uh, so about 10, 12 years ago, early 2000 teens in that time, I ran a business that we did tribute videos for people. So like if you want to do a video for your mom, we get 30 or 40 or 50 people saying what they love and appreciate about her. They just send in a quick video clip. We put all those together and then we showed at a birthday party or a retirement or something like that. And I did several hundred of those videos over a few years. And somewhere along the way, it wasn't at the very beginning, it was probably 30, 40, 50 in, quite a few in. I started to see that there was always a theme in the video. The person was about love or joy or happiness, something like that. It wasn't loud, it wasn't overt, it wasn't like everybody said the same thing. But I had an interest in like personal development and transformation. I came to that job, and because I just was sitting there for literally years of my life listening to people say nice things about someone they love, I just started to pick up there's this theme. And this was the time that I started reading books on, knowing your purpose and understanding your why and values. Like I started reading that, and then it dawned on me that that theme that I was seeing, that was who that person was. And they had shared it through their actions and interactions with their family and friends. And then their family and friends were reflecting it back in their videos. And I got like this essence of who they were. And I did videos for people 7 to 90 all over the world, like very famous people and very just everyday moms, dads, and grandparents. And because of that, I'm like, oh, we all have something at our core. It's there from our lives from a very early age. It impacts our actions and interactions, and we don't know what it is, but it's there. And no one person could see it. Like no one person said, "Oh, these are the values," but it was because it was just all the collection. So I was like, wow, this is really interesting. So I went to work to figure out how to bring that coreness and those core values from the background of our lives to the foreground. And I went to work and I was super excited. I was like, oh, I got the system, and I started trying to coach people, and it failed miserably. It just didn't work. And in looking back, there were a variety of things, but where it really came to a head, it was in January of 2022, so about a little over 3 years ago. I woke up one day totally burnt out. I my business was struggling. I was going through a divorce. It was post-COVID. I was living alone. It just was like, just a bunch of stuff. I couldn't say any one thing, but I woke up one day and I said, I just can't be anything but myself. I just don't have the energy. And then a couple days later, I woke up and I said, okay, well, if I can only be me, then who am I and how can I be more of that? And then a few days after, or a few weeks after that, because at that time I had worked it out to where I had 5 core values. I had that. And a friend of mine told me the story about the Navy SEALs who put everything in sets of 3. The Navy SEALs being the military group here, in the US. And it, this transformation was not brilliant. It was not deep. It was literally, well, it wasn't this language, but it was screw it. I'll just do 3 because that sounds easier. And so I reduced my core values to courage, connection, and curiosity. And then I started waking up every day saying, how can I bring courage, connection, and curiosity to my day? And at the beginning, it was, I'm going to wake up, I'm going to go to the bathroom, I'm going to get a drink of water, I'm going to get back into bed. Like that was all the courage I had because I just didn't have the energy. Because, you and your listeners know when you burn out, you're burnt. I mean, it is a level of exhaustion that is you can't share until you don't know what it's like until you experience it. But so I did that. It was like baby step, baby step, baby step. And then within a few months, I woke up one day and I was like, wait a minute, I'm not burnt out anymore. It was as shocking as the day that I woke up burnt. I woke up not, and I didn't do any yoga, I didn't do any meditation, I didn't do any journaling, I didn't do anything. I just kept exploring these core values. Excuse me, these core values. And what that taught me was like trying to be anything but yourself is exhausting fundamentally. And then if you add on external sources like divorce and COVID and business challenge, you add those on, it just wears you down. And then at some point you hit a wall, which is what happened to me. So then I went a little hog wild. I get very excited about stuff, you might tell. And I went very excited. I was like, core values this, core values this. I was talking to clients, and it was going, and it was great. But after a few months, I was like, this just isn't working the way it just wasn't working the way I wanted. And that got me thinking, exploring, because one of my core values is curiosity. And one thing I'm very proud of is I oftentimes in this journey is I hit a wall rather than giving up or thinking I should be doing something else, which I did do. But in the places that I really worked for me is I kept just being curious about the situation. And then so I realized that there's a difference between who we are and how we operate. Our core values are who we are, but we need a way to bring those core values to our business, to our life, to our relationship, to our whatever, to actually make it work. And I'm going to wrap this up. It's almost done here. I know this is getting long. So I talked to a bunch of people, and I worked out a plan that said, okay, how do people do things? And we came up with this pretty general. It's 5 steps. It's nothing profound. It shows up in other places. Basically, you say, okay, what's the goal? What's going on in that situation right now? What's our plan? What actions can we take? And then how can we grow and celebrate? And I was like, awesome. And we rolled that out, and we started talking to people. And again, a few months later, just not working the way I want. And my people were exhausted. And I'm like, wait a minute, we have a step for celebration. Like at the end, you should be celebrating yourself. Like, why aren't you celebrating yourself? And I got a little frustrated. But what I realized, and when I looked at my own life, is that by the time we get done with something, we are too often exhausted, too exhausted, too self-critical, too self-deprecating. Maybe we think that celebration should only come from someone else, so we don't actually celebrate ourselves. So then I said, oh, well, then let's move celebration to the front. And people were like, can we do that? And I said, yes. And from that's been about a year now. So we always celebrate, we say, hey, what can you celebrate about yesterday? What's the goal? What isn't working in that area? What do your core values say to do? And we always get your core values down to 3. And then what actions can you take today? And that process is just magical. It just works. And every time I go through it, like I just used it today, it just teaches you something new. It energizes you. It gives you confidence. It sparks innovation. And excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. It gives you the energy to do the things that you need to do, so you physically cannot burn out. I mean, maybe you could, but I just don't think you can. It would do it long. So all that story said, it's been this long journey of me basically doing my work on myself. Lots of struggles, going where, but now it's really about talking to people. Hey, are you in a space that you need to? You're either are burnt out or slipping towards that, and you need to recover, or you're like, hey, I want to have more creativity, more innovation, more confidence, and we use the exact same process, but they kind of have different focuses.
And I can totally resonate with what you were saying about, just not being yourself. Really, like, who else should we be than ourselves? And yet, obviously, we live in a world where, again, we are encouraged to be everyone else but our original, unique, authentic selves, because often we are not fitting into the, Netflix influencer stereotypical mold. We're unique, we're weird, we're quirky. But it's just so hard, as you said, to mask, to pretend, to fake, to avoid doing the things we want to be avoiding, to every day just try to please other people. And I do think a big part of this is people pleasing. It's the guilt that we carry from, well, if I'm myself, will I be hurting others? Will I, disappoint my parents? Will my partner still want me? Will my boss still accept me? Will my friends still love me? So how do you then work with people when sometimes if we dig into our core values, we can uncover things that we've been hiding because again, we think that they're not going to be accepted, that we're no longer going to fit into our tribe, into our community. We will feel as an outcast, or we will be, not fitting in properly. And that is scary because we are wired for connection and belonging and a little bit of the, you know, conformity with people. So how do you then help people overcome this fear? Obviously, courage is one of your words, and courage is required. But on a practical level, what can we do as we dig into our core values so we may uncover something that we have known and have been on purpose pushing away, or we have not been even aware that our true self, our true core values are just pushing us away from our comfort, our safety net, our people?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's an ongoing journey. This is what I say is like your, my core values are courage, connection, and curiosity. And when I really got grounded in those, it became aware to me that there are places in my life where I am 100% courageous, connected, and curious, like awesome, and there are a bunch of places where I'm not. And that was true before I knew my core values. That's true today, and that will be true if I'm doing this work 10 years from now. It does. You're always going to be bumping up against limits. And when I understood this, for me, I had this dual experience. One, it was like, oh, well, no, well, the first one is like, oh, well, I'm never going to be perfect, and I want to be perfect. I had that, like, I want to be good. That. Um, and so I was like, oh, I'm never going to be perfect. But then I also had freedom. It's like, I'm never going to be this way. I'm never going to be 100%. So then the question always basically comes back to asking those questions. What can I celebrate about where I have been? What is my goal in this particular area? What's working and what's not? And how can I apply my core values to the situation? And then what actions can I take? And by doing that, you just keep moving forward. You're just acknowledging that there's places where you are great at being yourself and there's places where you're not, and that's always going to happen. It does not matter how far along. One of the things that is like an exercise that you can do is once you do identify your core values, let's say, like, I'm going to guess one of your core values is adventure. I'm just going to put that out there as or play or fun. There's something like that. And and so what you can do is you can look back in your life and see all the places where play, fun, or adventure already shows up. You're not perfect at it, but there will absolutely be places where there's like little stepping stones. And you're like, hey, here's the places where I've been my full self. And then you can say, okay, where have I not been? Where have I struggled? And what that does to me is it doesn't answer the questions of how can I be my full self, with my boss, who I've never really been my full self with. It doesn't mean you're going to immediately be that, but it will give you the little bit of the foundation, a little bit of the confidence, a little bit of the sense of like, I can do this and I've already done it, to bring it. And then, and then the other part is that your core values are much more about practice than perfection. So one of the things that you can do is you can go out and have conversations with people. You could say, hey, let's say one of your core values is creativity. You could say, hey, you could talk to your friends and say, this is what creativity means to me. Da, 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 da. What does creativity mean to you? And they'll answer in some other, because they have their own version of that. And so you can practice sharing that. And one of the beautiful things is that if you practice being your full self intentionally in, quote, the safe areas of your life, maybe with a friend or a family member, or maybe you have a coworker that you can really be yourself with, then then when the time comes and you're on that sales presentation or you're at that job interview or you're talking to the boss and they say, hey, so tell me about yourself, you just have the muscle memory to be yours. This reminds me, I have a friend of mine who I was working with who is a high level sales guy. He's like built brands. Like he's really like, and when you know him, like I knew him from college, like really good at sales. Like he's just like a sales guy and he's great at it. And he got laid off. The past few years, sales weren't going well, and we did this work together. And his core values were authenticity, growth, and family. And and he's also a guy. He's a little more conservative. He's like, I can't talk about this at work. Like they can't. I can't do this. And I said, okay. And honestly, we kind of stopped working together because he wasn't willing to really share this beyond himself. And so there wasn't much more I could do with him. So we stopped. Like 3 months after that, I got a text from him. He's like, oh my God, this worked. Because he went to a job interview and they said, we're looking for someone who is very grounded. And he said, I don't know if how grounded I am exactly, but my core values are family, authenticity, and growth. And And he told a story how the interviewer had great experience. 2 weeks later, he got a call back, and then he got the job. And they said, the interviewer and the hiring managers, because we loved your core values. And so this was a guy who, by his own things, like, I can't share this. But because he had practiced it enough, because we had even had the conversation, he was able to bring it up in a quote stressful time. And he had the courage. I mean, I got to applaud him for the courage that it took to do that. But it really made a difference. And I think so it's been about 18 months since he's had that job, and he's moving forward.
Before I ask my question, I have something to ask, and it's most probably I'm extremely ignorant, but I'm also I'm gonna ask for a friend. How's this? I'm gonna ask for a friend. Is when you say Reno, Nevada, I'm thinking desert, and then you say you went skiing.
Yeah. So Reno is in northern Nevada, near the California mountains. So Lake Tahoe, which is a very world known ski area, is 30 miles from here. And I grew up in this area about an hour and a half south of here in the California mountains, and we went skiing there. So this part, Reno, is absolutely a desert, but a little bit of driving, you get to a ski resort.
Thank you. A little bit of geography while we're at it. So thank you for that. And just a little bit of, like I said, asking for a friend.
Yes.
So values is something that I'm, quite passionate about, and it's something that I have worked with for myself, but also through my coaching and with clients that I've had, is values are important. But one thing that often comes up, and I'd love for you to answer this, and I'm sure some of our listeners might even have this, is that there's values and there's core values. Can you explain it in your way? What is the difference between values and core values? Because like you said, core values are, you can really bring them down, but then there's all the other values that we have as well. And can you explain a little bit for our listeners the difference between values and then the core values?
Yeah. I think ultimately what there is that we have a sense of like who we are, and you use core values to bring some language to that sense of who we are. And I look at it, our core values is who we are at our very best. Like when I'm at my very best, I'm being courageous, I'm connecting with people, I'm being curious. Like that's who I am at my very best. And that thing, and this comes from my work with the videos. Like I don't know where that core thing, that theme that I was seeing in the videos came from, because these were not like, it wasn't like I was doing hyper aware spiritual. These were just everyday moms, dads, and grandparents. And so what that taught me is that we have something at our core, and it may come from a spirit, a soul, an energy, a God, whatever you want to call it. Maybe it's just the way the human brain is wired, as part of an evolutionary spirit, that we developed this internal thing. But that thing has been with us for a very long time, and probably at least, and it was there when you were young. So that's why I put core values in the language of a young person, courage, connection, curiosity, things that you might have said when you were 10, 11, 12, because that's when we first would have experienced it. So I look at our core values as things that have been with us for a very long time. And then like the values and the goals that you might put on top of that, those will change as, the goals that I had as a 14, 16, 18-year-old are different than I have now. But if I look back in my life, they are reflections of courage, connection, and curiosity. And so, people ask me like, well, do our core values change? I don't think our core values change all that much. Maybe our languaging of it changes a bit. But what does change is our manifestations of it. Obviously, when I had my son, things changed a bit. When you get married, when you meet someone, when you go traveling, you can still be yourself, but your expression of that changes. So that's why we go back to saying, hey, what do your core values say to do in this situation? And you can use that when you're traveling. You can use that well, here's an example. A year ago, I just moved here to Reno. I went rock climbing. I fell, broke my leg in 3 places. And it turned out it was broken at the ankle and up at the top by the knee. And so you can imagine, like, I just could not get comfortable. So I'm in the ER and just moaning in pain. And it was just bad. And my son looks at me, he was 16 at the time. He looks at me, he's like, Dad, what your core values are missing right now? And I'm like, mother, like, I'm like, what are you doing? And he said, Dad, you're always saying that if there's a problem, one of your core values is missing. And clearly this is a problem. So which one is there? And he was being a bit of a wise ass. I mean, for sure. But he knew that I had said that a million times. And I thought about it, and I had broken my leg and I was really scared. I didn't know what to do. I just moved to this town. Like, there just was a bunch of fear. And I said, okay, how can I be a little courageous here? And that calmed me down a bit. And then I started to think, okay, how can I be, like, a curiosity kind of came in, and I started thinking about, what am I going to learn about life from having a broken leg that I wasn't going to learn from having, two normal legs. And I don't remember any answers I came up with. But I do remember that as I was going to the nurses and the doctors and the x-rays and the this and waiting for the bad news and, just all that stuff, that little focus gave my brain some direction. And what was once a very scary situation allowed me to connect. And then just connect to myself and move forward. And then I actually connected with the nurses. Like, they were just like, we just had this, it was, I have this connection with these people where I was very afraid. And that happened because my son was just like, there. So all that being said, I think that your core values are, that's why we get them down to 3, because they're easy to use and remember. And then all the other manifestations, all the wonderness of your life is the expression of that, if that makes sense.
I love how you described it, and this is something that is so wonderful with our guests, is they see things in a different way and they describe it in a different way. So thank you for that. It's really beautiful, and I guess there's nothing worse than a 16-year-old spewing your words back at you right when you want it.
It was the funniest thing because honestly, like, it was the perfect coaching. Like, you could not have paid a coach to ask a better question at that time. And had I could I have moved from the chair that I was in, moaning in pain? I probably would have smacked him, but fortunately I didn't. And he was a couple chairs away. But it was awesome. It was great. I mean, it was one of those moments where I'm like, wow, it was great. I loved him for him. I'm like, wow, I've actually imparted some wisdom as a father to, like that was a very father moment. And I just really respected him for speaking up that way, because not every kid would do that.
It's brilliant. So, you've spoken a lot about, your core values and having found them, but not all of our listeners will have the privilege or the expertise to have, taken a lot of videos and had that sort of starting point. And I know that values are one of these words that get flown around, like authenticity and be more authentic and be more yourself and be, know who you are. But these are not always the easiest things to do, as Lenka alluded to earlier. From school, you sort of starting to be put into a box. And if you're a creative child or imaginative child, is stop daydreaming, focus. If you're a noisy child who likes to bounce about, is keep still. So, from school, you sort of starting to have to shed who you are so that you can fit into these boxes. And when you become an adult and, in your 30s, 40s, or 50s, you don't necessarily know who you are anymore. And you might be wanting to connect and you might be starting on that journey. And some of our listeners are quite far down that journey and they most probably do have ideas. But how would somebody start to find ways to really get to know who they are? And I know you mentioned looking back in the past, and I think you just woke up and thought, these are it, and you've nailed it down to 3. And I know 3 is a good number. So, feel free for our listeners to nail them down to 3. But how can people start to find a way without getting overwhelmed by books and podcasts and YouTube and all that? And not everybody can remember stuff from their past. I know I'm one of those. I've totally denied my past, and it's quite difficult to remember things. So yeah, how can somebody start? And maybe if they are on the journey, how can they dig deeper?
Yeah, it's a great question. This came again, this came from the video work. I feel so fortunate that I did that work because I knew it was right there. There's one thing I've realized is that our core values are much closer to the surface than we realize. Like they are there, and they show up in all sorts of different ways. And I'll make sure that y'all get this, but we can put in your show notes there. I have a form at joeychandler.net/core values, and it asks you 3 questions that will help you come up with 3 core values in about 5 minutes. And I'll share the questions now, but I highly recommend going to the form. It's actually easy. It's actually easier to do the form because you don't have to listen to me. You can just be with your thoughts on this. But the questions are: when you interact with people, how do you want them to feel? And this will be something like you want them to feel heard or motivated, inspired, safe, something in that realm. And then you say, okay, think of a time when you felt whatever those words were. Let's say the person said safe, heard, and motivated, those 3. Think of a time when you felt like that. Think of that experience. And then how would you describe that feeling in a language of a young person? Because remember, our core values, I said, come from us from a long time. So we want to get them back. And it's not saying that you had that experience of feeling safe, heard, and motivated as a child. That's not that, because some people really didn't. And that, and my goal is not to trigger anyone that, but the language that you would have used to describe the feeling. And what I found is that generally lands in something in the realm of love, joy, happiness, excitement, or freedom. It's not always, but those are the top 5. So then I call that your core word. That's kind of like the essence, the full essence of who you are. But those are big, broad words. And so, like when I did that exercise, I got to love was mine. And then I asked myself, okay, what are 3 words that contribute to help me experience and mean love to me? And I did a little thought, and I didn't do this exact. It wasn't 100% immediately, but the process was the same. And I came up with courage, connection, and curiosity. And then you can start to see, oh, this is all the places that are there. And that, like I said, you can go to the form, you fill it out. It takes about 5 minutes. And because your core values are much more present, much more present too when you than we were. And when you think about the language of a young person, it stops you from what I call adultifying your core values. Because most people, when they do core values, they're like, here's a list of 50 words, choose 20, choose 10, choose 5, like whatever it is. And at some point you start thinking, what's the right one? What's the one that's really right for me? And we end up oftentimes with like authenticity, integrity, just other words that as a teenager, you wouldn't have said those words. You meant like there's something there. So by going back to a young person, you create a word that means something. The other, excuse me, the other thing that I do is I encourage people to pick one word, something like creativity, fun, play, adventure, mine is curiosity, because if your core values were present when you were a young person, you would have had some of that essence. And so we want to maintain that. And it's so much fun because people would be like, oh, I pick all these words. And I'm like, aren't you kind of fun? Like I've gotten good at kind of picking up on the essence of people, maybe not 100%, but getting close. And that's why I said, Lenka, I said adventure. Like it doesn't take anybody to know that, you're traveling and you're in Spain, and adventure or something like it must be part of who you are. Otherwise you wouldn't be doing it. And when you give the people the freedom to bring that fun, that play, adventure to their full lives, it's just they light up. They're like, oh my gosh, you mean I can be adventurous at work? And I'm like, yeah. And then we start talking about how can they bring fun or adventure or play to their work, and they'll always see this. They'll see places where they already are doing it, and they'll see some places where they're not. And we can celebrate those places, and then we can say, hey, how can we bring a little more adventure? So again, joeychandler.net/core values is the place to go. But those three questions: how do you want people to feel? How would you how would you describe that? Excuse me. And then what does that what's three words that describe that core word to you? And that will get you very, very close. And then you go out and share those, you journal about them, you write them. And if you have to make tweaks, you make tweaks, but you always want three because it's just easier to remember.
And I think really starting to understand your core values, like you said, fun. We'll use adventurous and fun because these are words that you've used. And not everybody's job might allow them or embrace it. And then that might be something, if that is a real core value, is okay, is it time for me to maybe look for something else where I can fit in better, being myself, as opposed to having to almost shed my skin or shed myself, leave myself in the car. I'll go to work for 8 hours and then I'll pick myself up on the way home. And I think a lot of people do that because we fit into these boxes. But when you start to understand a little bit more about yourself and especially your core values, because like you said, we live our core values. It's such a subconscious thing. It's we can live without an extra jersey if it's a bit chilly while we go to the car. We can live with that, but we cannot live without our core values. Not really to be who we are, our quirky selves, as Lenka uses. I love that word that she uses for describing us. And it can then help people to think, okay, maybe I'm miserable in my job and it might be because of I'm not being who I am. It could be other reasons. Right, this gives me now a good opportunity to look for a job or start your own business or whatever it is. Could almost be that kick up the butt to say, okay, you need to make changes, because it's all very well understanding your core values, but then what are you going to do with them? And if you're wanting to have more life in your life, we've got to do something with them. It's all very well just saying, yeah, but I've got bills, I've got this, but how can we start to find the right jobs or the right career or the right business to help us to do it so that you're not staying stuck? Because the point of having more life in one's life is to have more life in one's life.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great point. But here's the most interesting part. You wouldn't have taken that job had it not fulfilled on your core values in some way. It doesn't matter. There's so many millions of jobs that whatever job you take, it fulfills on your core values in some way. Now, it may not have fulfilled on it as much as you expected when you took that job. You thought it was going to go one way, but the job ended up being something else. Or maybe over time you've lost the aspect of the job that you really like. But what I find really interesting is to first clarify your core values and then look back and say, okay, where do those core values already show up in my job? Now, it may not be as much as you want. 100%, that's probably likely, but it's probably more than you think. And what you can do is you can say, okay, these are my core values. Here where it shows up. And then you have an option. You can say, okay, it shows up. You know what? If I have a conversation with my boss or this coworker or this or that, maybe I can start to warp and transform my job into something that actually really does work. Because let's be honest, nobody takes a job wanting to quit it. You want that job to work. Or let's just say most folks. You want that job to work. And so if you had the ability to bring more of your core values to a situation, then you can make that job work. Now, it may be like, you know what, when I first got that job, my core values were here and it showed up this way and this way. And that's, it's kind of reached to the end of its journey. And now it's time for me to move on. But that at least then when you go have the job interview, when you're talking to someone, instead of saying, yeah, I ended up hating my job and I want a new one, which no one really wants to hire that person because they just know that you're going to end up hating them. You can say, well, my core values were like my friend, family growth and contribution, or family growth and authenticity was his. And you can say, and this is how it showed up on my thing, and now I'm looking for something new. I want to have a bigger expression of that. And so it creates a foundation for you to find something that really works, coming from a more positive aspect rather than, the anger and frustration. That's so, I mean, I've done it. You end up like, I'm out of here. You burn down the house, you do everything. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really reflect who you are. It's not taking any accountability or responsibility for the situation. And as much as we don't like it, people want to hire people who are willing to say, hey, this is, I did this, and this worked, this didn't, and here's what I want to do at your company.
And it's interesting, we're talking about how to do it more specifically in our professional life, in work, but my part of my brain goes, but this applies to relationships. In relationship, we go in a relationship with a partner because we believe that we have some values and they have some values, and then we grow and evolve, and sometimes we realize more of ourselves, and out of nowhere realize that our values are really not aligned, or we've been raised in a family with certain values, but we are just not the pure copy of our family. We are different. And then as we grow up and as we go through life, we realize that maybe our values are not as aligned with our friends and family. So that's an interesting also perspective on, how do we then navigate a situation where it's not as easy as I'm going to quit a job and find a new one. That seems reasonably easy, but how do I break up with my partner? Do I ask for divorce? Do we work on it? Do we go to therapy together? Do I, separate from my family? Do I cut loose ties because we're really not compatible? Have you ever met someone, worked with someone where it's more on the personal side, that they really are realizing that they're just not aligned with the people around them, and then they have to somehow find a way of either, creating more distance, breaking up, or any kind of solution to when this situation, this realization of disconnect happens in our personal lives?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I describe myself as a life and business coach, because you're not going to be talking core values for any amount of time and not cross over between life and business, because, we are who we are. And there's a lot as you're talking, I actually was thinking of my own experience. So I'm divorced now. And when I look back at what led up to the divorce, I could see that I was not courageous enough to express what I really wanted in the relationship or what I expected. I was like, I thought relationships go this way, and when it didn't go that way, I didn't have the courage, or maybe the curiosity to really explore, like, hey, what's missing for me, and then speak up about it. And there were it was one of those things where it's just like it wasn't anything major. It was just like small thing, small thing, small thing, and then eventually it built up to where it became a big thing. And I can look back and and this is one thing that I find interesting is, like, had I said, hey, this isn't working out for me way back, early on, like, we wouldn't have had my son, and that would be a devastating loss to me. So I, I'm sort of glad that I didn't say what I said, at that time, but I also recognize that I do need to speak up at times. And so, and then in doing that, when we were going through the divorce, and we were going to therapy, and we were, I was in the space of trying to get her back together. I was doing all that work, and I cannot remember what led to this thought. I can't even really remember where I was, but there was a moment where I said, wait a minute, why am I doing so much work to try to get her back when she doesn't love me the way I want to be loved? Like, why am I doing all of that work? And I'm like, she used to love me. That, we used to have that relationship where we loved each other in the way that we wanted to be loved, and it was great, but we're not there now. So why am I doing all that work? And when that happened, I was able to take a deep breath. I was able to say, okay, we're getting divorced. I was the one who went to the courthouse. I filled out the paperwork. I took ownership of the relationship going forward. Whereas I think a lot of guys end up blaming, the general story is the woman files the divorce, the man blames the woman, and you end up with this fight. I said, no, I'm going to take this ownership. And I think one of the things I'm most proud of is that we have a very strong relationship in raising our son, and we stayed, it's not perfect. I'm not going to say it's always perfect, but I think we stayed very well. We avoided a lot of very common arguments and experiences that you hear about. And I think from my own perspective, now my ex did a ton of stuff too. I'm not saying I was the only one, but from my perspective, in that moment where I said, I got curious, why am I trying to love her the way it was? And then I had the courage to speak up and say, and kind of admit it to myself, and then say to her, and then that allowed for the connection. That was a big one for me. Like that was, and it's hard, right? You're in a relationship to say what you want because you're afraid the person's going to say no and then leave. But of course, it's usually the not saying of what you want, which ends up being the problem, and that's the challenge. I have one thing I just love. This one story is I was working with a guy, another sales guy, he trains salespeople. So he's like he understands sales psychology. Like, he just, and so we started talking. I'm like, okay, tell me what's not working in your business and what do you want to talk about? And he's like, business is fine. And honestly, it was. He's like, but I'm having a real hard time with my 15-year-old son. Him and his wife and his son were butting heads, and I don't even know what they were butting heads about, but it was teenage stuff, but it was really bothering him, and he was really frustrated because he's like, I understand psychology in every which way or shape or form. Why am I struggling with my son? I said, okay, well let's do it. So we do his core values, and one of them was appreciation. His I think his word was excitement, and appreciation was the thing. And it was really interesting because he kept saying over and again, he's like, I don't know why I picked that, but it really spoke to me. I was like, okay, well, and I never question people. I'm like, you chose that word, that's the word, let's go with it. And this was on a Tuesday, and I said, okay, I want you to go talk to your wife just about what appreciation means, and just kind of have this. On Thursday, he called me back. He's like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. He was super excited and totally shocked because he's like, I had this amazing conversation with my wife about appreciation, and I was just really connecting. I was like, great. Have you talked to your son yet? He's like, not yet. And I'm like, okay, go do that. That was Thursday. On Monday, he calls me and he said, Joey, I had the best Father's Day ever. Now, I've had people tell me wins. I had a sales call. I had this, but to have a father say I had the best Father's Day ever in a week that was like, I'm like, okay, do tell what happened. And he just told the story how him and his wife and his son sat down and they started exploring. And what he realized is that he wasn't feeling appreciated, that he was doing stuff that and so he was able to say what he had to say. That gave the space for his son to say what he had to say. And I don't know what they said. We didn't get into those details, but they were able to say whatever had to be said. They connected, and then I think they went and played golf or tennis. This has been a couple years, but they went and he again, best Father's Day ever. And this was in 1 week with a man who, by any standards, is a extremely high level, done all the workshops, done all the things, done everything. And to me, that just goes to show, like, it does not matter how aware, brilliant you are. In a place where you're stuck, some aspect of your core values are either missing or could be elevated. So you go through the process of clarifying your core values and saying, hey, what do they say to do in this area? You're always going to come up with an answer. And I'm not going to say it's always creates the best Father's Day ever, because that's a pretty high bar, but it always moves you forward in an interesting way.
That is such a beautiful story. And I mean, like you said, it's not just about business. It is about family or personal or relationships and especially to talk to teenagers. I mean, Lenka and I, we don't have kids, but I mean, I just think about me being a teenager or looking around at teenagers. They're not the easiest humans to get on with. I mean, they dealing with their own stuff. So to be able to open up, and I think because it sounds like because he was talking about his core values and trying to understand it, it opens up that door for communication. It opens up that door for the sharing. And I think that is so important, because it's all very well knowing your core values, but I think it's learning to communicate, or building that bridge, or just being open to having conversations. I mean, conversations themselves are so powerful anyway. And when we shut that down, then there's no room for communication or anything. And through your story is just showing that your client started that conversation, and then you're able to see where it's from. And if you're coming from a place of core values, then I think you are more open to what other people are saying. You know, it's not always easy to start a conversation because you do put yourself into that space of vulnerability. Is like, oh, am I going to get shut down? Or am I going to get laughed at? Am I going to get poo-pooed? You know, it's just being there. But I think when you are sitting in your core values with the conversation, I think it can almost give you more courage. I'll use that word, but it can, you might not feel as vulnerable because you know that's your strength, if that makes sense. So that was a really beautiful story that you shared, and I hope our listeners will get their nuggets from that, what they can get from it. So thank you for sharing that story. Hop on to our Patreon account to get this episode's amazing and wonderful gold nugget. So for our listeners who've been listening to this episode and they want to have more, or reach out or just connect with you in some way, I mean, you have shared that core values questions. The link will be in the description, but how else can people reach out and connect with you?
Yeah, I'm at Joey Chandler 70 across all social media. The places I'm on the most, there's TikTok, and I'm just starting with YouTube Shorts, but those are the places where I'm at the most. But yeah, at Joey Chandler 70, you can find me anywhere. And I talk about a range of things. It's especially now, like you said, I talk family, business, politics, all this stuff, because it's all core values are at the bottom of all that. And so the question is, how can we use them? So yeah, and I would love, anybody who wants to connect, I would love to hear your thoughts.
It's all connected. We cannot have life without having a career. We cannot have a career without having life. And it's all coming back to us as human beings, as individuals, and really knowing and understanding and following our, instincts, following our truth. So thank you so much for a really wonderful conversation today. But we always like a little bit more. So I have one final question before we let you go. And that is, what brings you life right now? We talk about everything and anything, about having healthier, happier, more fulfilling life. So I'm curious, what brings you life?
So the spending time with my son, I'll say that has been we've had divorce, COVID, we've had a variety of things, and I feel like we're kind of coming through a positive spot. Yeah, and so that really brings me life. But I gotta say, some of the most fun times, those after you figure out your core values, you ask the five questions. Well, what can I celebrate? What's my goal? And you go through that process. And a couple months ago, and you never know. This is the part. This is that brings me life. I never know what's going to happen when I speak that. And a couple months ago, I was starting to date a girl or a woman, and it wasn't very long, but I was kind of excited. I was like, this is kind of cool, and then we had a call, and she's like, yeah, no. And it wasn't. And that same day, like literally the day before, a group of women had asked me to put together a course on dating. And so I was like super excited. And then I got this, and so I couldn't do either. I'm like, I got dumped and this job. I just didn't feel comfortable doing the job. So I was embarrassed. I was angry. I was frustrated. And again, it's not like we did date a lot, but I kind of felt like some good things were happening. And so it was a bummer. And the next day, so I go to bed angry, embarrassed, just all the stuff. And literally out of habit, not out of at all brilliance or transformation or anything. I just said, okay, what can I celebrate about yesterday? And there was, I don't remember what it was, but there was a little bit. And what was my goal? What's working? What's not? What do my core values say to do? And it just gave me this thing. And then all of a sudden I started to see like, oh, here's actually where I was maybe not as my full self. And I started to see and explore, and I learned from that. And I, within not immediately, definitely within a day or two, I was totally energized, I was back. And that has happened over and over and over again, where I just go through that process, something new pops up in the morning when I'm laying in my bed, usually pissed off about something. I'll go through that process, and something new will pop up. And that's I don't want to brag about my own work, but I'm 100% into my own work. Is that it just when you tap into your core values, something new bubbles up that you can't expect. You never ever can expect, and it's such a good feeling.
Oh, I love it. And it always amazes us at what gives people more life in their life. And it is so personal. And this is why we like to ask this question, because you never know what will give somebody an aha moment or just help somebody. So thank you so much for sharing that, and for sharing that you were dumped. Bless you. It's not a nice place to be, but it is part of life, and we all experience it, but it's how you deal with it. So thank you for bringing in a little humor to the end of it, because
Yes.
yes, for people who are listening and not watching, he was smiling through the whole story, so it couldn't have been that traumatic.
Oh no, but it was like that day that I was dark. It was bad. Like it was, and that's what made it so fun. Like because I literally was like I have to give up. Like it was horrible. But going through the process, it made it fun. That's the part that's fun. But in that moment, it sucked. It sucked.
Yeah, but when you look at your face, the way you're talking about it, you wouldn't believe it.
Well, it was bad. It was.
There we go. There we go. So for our listeners, he was pulling a face. But anyway, so thank you so much for sharing your time, sharing your energy with us, coming on and sharing your experiences and your story and your knowledge. We really appreciate. It's fairly early in the morning for you. It's late afternoon for us. Lenka even later than myself. But thank you again for just being here and just sharing with us and with our listeners, your experiences and your perspective on life, because it is, everybody has a different, sees things in a different way, which is always something that we love sharing. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. This has been really fun. It's difficult to do a two-person interview, and you guys did great. I just want to acknowledge you for that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm.
And for our listeners, what have you got from today? Is values or even core values something that your values and they are right there and you remind yourself of them every day? Or is this something that you want to start to dig into your values and start to know more about them? We'd love to know, or what aha moments did you get from listening today, from our guest today? You shared some amazing stories. What did you get from them? What sort of nuggets did you get from them? Please do share with us. We'd love to know. We'd love to know, what are your core values? How do you incorporate them into your life? Or we'd love to hear your journey of finding out your values, because that could be fun in its own way. But until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Bye. Here is your reminder about our Patreon, where you get all our really beautiful gold nuggets. And today we had a fantastic gold nugget to share. Subscribe to Patreon. The link is in the description below. Hop into the gold nugget section to access all our wonderful gold nuggets. There is also a free section where you can access snippets from past episodes, as well as some great content with tips, advice, and beautiful and wonderful wisdom. Come and join up and be part of the Into Your Life community. We would love to see you there.